All right, good morning, everyone. If you came a little bit early, you would have noticed a time-lapse video of cruise ship being constructed. And the reason for that is the topic of today's lecture is production and the theory of production and how production decisions are made by firms, or at least in theory, because as you can see from the production process of a cruise ship, that process is really, really complicated. An awful lot of people are involved, a lot of equipment, a lot of time management, a lot of financing, a lot of everything goes into producing a cruise ship like that. And our theory is going to be a whole lot simpler than that. We're going to be focusing on some bare basic essentials, and we're going to see if we can make some simple sense out of the production process of a firm in general. Today, and in the next couple of lectures actually, is going to be building up a model or the theory of production. And in the process of that, we're going to be introducing a lot of economic concepts or terminology and giving you definitions of those particular terms, learning how to understand them, why they might be relevant to a firm in terms of its decisions about what to produce, how much to produce, and so forth. And so we're going to kind of work our way through these elements, and all of this is going to kind of come together in a little while, because what we're going to be doing is introducing production, and then after understanding the cost structure, which we'll look at today, next lecture, we're going to be looking at what would happen if a monopoly firm, one firm operating in the market, tries to supply a product to that particular market. How would they make their decisions? What would they produce? What would be the pricing of their particular product? And so forth. And that'll be interesting in and of itself, but it'll be even more interesting when we compare it to the next progression, the next step, which will come next week when we talk both about the theory of oligopoly, that is what happens if there's several firms competing against each other in a marketplace, and then we're going to follow on with that to what's called the theory of perfect competition. And in that model, we're going to imagine that there's lots and lots and lots of firms that are producing a particular product and competing against each other. And the most interesting outcome we're going to get from this structured analysis is we're going to see what happens as we introduce more and more competition into a particular marketplace. We're going to see how that affects the businesses themselves. We're going to see how that affects the consumers or the purchasers of the goods. And then we're going to add up all the effects upon all of these different groups, and we're going to try to see what is the overall market effect of introducing more and more competition into a particular marketplace. All right, and then when we find done with this, then we're going to be finally at a point where we can introduce the supply function, which comes about as an outcome of a perfectly competitive market setting. And then we can finally, at the second half of the semester, we're going to put supply and demand together, and we're going to be starting to work with those particular curves to help us understand a whole lot more about how the economy works. Okay, so this slide is showing a couple of the things we're going to do today. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to make a distinction between accounting and economic profit. And in doing so, we're going to bring into the equation, if you will, the notion of opportunity costs, which we've addressed in the context of the production model with Smith and Jones. But we're going to introduce it a little bit in a different context. And it's going to be important in recognizing how to define or how to understand this concept of economic profit and how to distinguish it from what's more typical and more commonly understood and measured, which is accounting profit. Okay, we're also going to look at some terminology. So you need to learn in the process of today's lecture and going forward the distinction between increasing returns to scale and decreasing returns to scale. And then there's a third one, which we're going to talk about today too, which is called constant returns to scale. And you're going to need to learn the differentiation between those different terms or concepts. Also going to need to learn about the difference and distinction between fixed costs versus variable costs in production, the differences between economies of scale and diseconomies of scale, how we measure that or how we evaluate that with respect to a particular production process. And interestingly, or very importantly, the difference between average costs and marginal costs, which these last ones are going to be kind of the key. This is what we're going to imagine firms are going to need to look at carefully in order to make decisions about how much output to produce. And it's also going to give us the ability to evaluate what the outcome is. how much profit, for example, firms are making in a particular market situation, how firms make decisions about optimal or ideal level of production to undertake. Those are going to be motivated, those decisions, by a recognition of average and marginal costs of production.